Good afternoon. We're here for our latest in our oral history series, and we are pleased to have with us today the current chair of the German Village Commission, Jay Panzer.
Thanks for inviting me.
We're glad you're here, Jay, and we look forward to hearing from you. And let's start from the beginning. Tell us about where you grew up and your early life.
I was really lucky to have an early life that spread between city and country. Was born and raised in New York for the first 8 or 9 years. Was born in Greenwich Village in the 1950s and got to live...
The old beat generation.
Exactly. A couple of blocks away from Folk City. Used to spend a lot of time at my aunt and uncle's house. I ultimately wound up moving back to New York and lived a half a block away from where my parents had first lived when they got married during World War II. We then, when I was about 8 or 9, moved to Princeton, New Jersey, so I got to experience the whole, bikes on the lawn, ride your bike to school, experience in a city that was, a town really, that was built in the 1600s, that was part of Princeton University.
You had some early experience in historic preservation when you were in Princeton.
I was really lucky when I was in high school. Firestone Library at Princeton University was expanding, and they knew from historical maps that there had been a tavern called the Hudibras Tavern, which was the principal stop between New York and Philadelphia on the old coach line. And we got to excavate that and as an archaeological dig, and got to spend a lot of time with that.
First taste of historic preservation, or at least discovery.
Pretty much. Wound up from there giving tours of downtown Princeton to as part of the Historical Society, and kind of lived that life for a long time.
Tell us about your mom and dad.
My father and mother met on a blind date with 2 other people during World War II. They were more attracted to each other than their dates, and got married shortly thereafter. My mother was a model and then wound up working for United Press International while my father was still in the Army, and my father subsequently bought a manufacturing business, and my mother kept working in political affairs for United Press International until we moved to Princeton in '65 or so.
You had some interesting people visit your house.
Well, my mother, being in the news business, was associated with a lot of people in the news, and I had mentioned that Walter Cronkite was a frequent guest in our house, both on the 7 o'clock news and at the 8 o'clock cocktail hour on the weekends.
You had an 8th grade teacher that was very important in your life.
Yeah. Georgine Hall and then Georgine Friedman was really the first exposure I had to professional theater, and really began the process of getting me to understand what the theater was about. And she was both my 8th grade English teacher, I think subsequently my 9th grade English teacher as well, but she was also a Broadway actress, and she would go after school, hop the train from New York, and go perform on Broadway and then take the train home. And
somehow that led to an interest in technical theater.
Yeah, from very early on I'd been interested in architecture, and I think it probably goes back to playing with blocks as a kid, and how things were put together. And when I got involved with the theater, it quickly became apparent that I was very interested in the way performances were put together, the way shows were put together, lighting design and sound system design and scenery construction and all that kind of stuff. And that really lasted through high school, and lasted through college at the University of Cincinnati.
After a year at Farley Dickinson and a brief foray into the restaurant business, you do wind up in Cincinnati, and that's where you got some training that led to your profession.
Yeah, the degree that I have from the University of Cincinnati is one that not many people have. It is a Bachelor of Fine Arts in Opera, Musical Theater, Technical Production. I think there's something like 20 of us before the degree name was changed to something like theater production. And that was really the first exposure I had to working at a very, very high level of theater, and many of the people, both on the design side and on the performer side, this was the College Conservatory of Music at UC, wound up in New York on Broadway and all over the world really. working in theater in various aspects.
Your dad's intense reading of the New York Times helped lead to your first big job.
I had graduated college, barely knowing what a theater consultant was. My father was a devout reader of the New York Times for his entire life. And he saw an ad for an architect with some knowledge of the theater useful or kind of beneficial. I said, "Dad, I'm not an architect. I don't qualify as an architect. I don't have a degree in architecture, so too bad." A little while later, he called me back into the room. He said, "I have another ad from the same company for an audiovisual consultant. Some knowledge of the theater, useful, beneficial." And I said, "Well, this is interesting, and this is probably something that I should follow up on." And it was a few months later that I wound up working at a consulting company in New York, where I stayed for 12 years.
And in that 12-year period, you worked on a number of theater projects, but one in particular was very important to your being here today.
Well, really a few. The first one was remarkably, right off the bat, found myself in Columbus, Ohio, working on the expansion of the Ohio Theater. The firm I worked for in New York did the audiovisual consulting. We designed the orchestra enclosure that's currently used by the symphony. And during that process, I was led down a very dark corridor through some very creaky doors into a very, very dark room with a flashlight, and it was Mary Bishop who had seen fit to show me the inside of the Southern Theater.
That theater was within an eyelash of the wrecking ball.
Well, but actually both the Ohio and the Southern had come very, very close to being demolished. The story of the Ohio was very well known. There's actually a very famous cartoon on the front page of the Dispatch. I think it goes back to about 1969, which actually showed a wrecking ball. It was really, I think, a matter of days before the Ohio came down when it was saved. And the Southern, likewise, was in a hotel that had seen much better days. And the history of the Southern was always tied up in being just a little bit behind the curve in terms of being an opera house, then being an early motion picture theater, and then getting into B movies, and it really did not have a great history from early on.
When you were still working on the Ohio Theater, it wasn't just the restoration of that. You also worked on what became the Galbraith Pavilion.
Yeah, the part of the Ohio Theater was the expansion of the Ohio, which included the Galbraith Pavilion, the first of the big backstage expansions, the orchestra pit. And a few years later, I found myself working on a feasibility study for the restoration of that dark, decrepit old theater I had been shown back in '84, and that was the Southern Theater.
There's a gentleman by the name of Doug Cridler who was important.
Doug Kreidler. Yeah, Doug and I first met at the opening of the Galbraith Pavilion. Sorry about the nails, that's Fred the dog. The opening of the Galbraith Pavilion in the spring of '84 was the first time I had met Doug. And we kept in touch, and he was the one who was the head of CAPA when we did the feasibility study. And a few years later, I found myself leaving the consulting firm in New York. And during a conversation where I told Doug I was leaving, and we were talking about some other things that were happening in Columbus, I said, keep me in mind if anything interesting ever happens with the Southern. And he initiated a conversation that led about 6 months later to me moving to Columbus.
You indicated to me that originally the plans for the Southern were to totally redo it, and that changed.
The charge, the charge of the board that was given to the planners of the Southern Theater was to create a performance space for the 21st century in a 19th century envelope. It was really not initially...
A modernization, completely.
We didn't know. That was not... The idea was to create this modern facility with no specific guidance early on as to what the interior was supposed to look like. This was going to be something that was going to be discovered as we moved through the planning process. Early in the planning process, we found that much more of the historic finishes were left in the theater than we had originally thought. We had originally thought that it had all been stripped out, and we found stained glass. When you walk into the Southern Theater, the sign is, the stained glass window over the entry is original or very, very early. The stained glass inside the lobby is original. Most of the plaster ornamentation is original or reproduction of what was right next to it.
That must have been fun to discover all.
Oh, it was incredibly fun because every day it was an exploration and discovery. It was really quite remarkable.
Is there a lot of research involved in that? Or can you tell if something's original just by looking?
No, we work with a company from Canada, from Toronto, to determine a lot of the original aspects of the room, a lot of the original finishes of the room. And it really is a scientific process. We worked with some very good architects. And of course, we had a staff at Kappa who became very involved with the process and was very familiar with old buildings. I mean, we had people who had worked in the Palace Theater for years, people who had worked for the Ohio Theater for a number of years. So we had a lot of in-house expertise, and we went outside and got the right people in. And
you encountered all the important people in the theater business in Columbus. I think you mentioned Gene D'Angelo and people like that.
From day one, literally before I was even hired, the interview process involved meeting with Gene D'Angelo, meeting with Larry Fisher, meeting with Barbara Locke. Of course, by the time I got here, David Muse was the chair of Kappa's board, who was just instrumental in making so much of what happened happen. And Rosa Stoles, who was the vice president of Kappa at the time, was really my partner in crime in terms of getting the Southern Theater accomplished.
You moved to Columbus for the Southern Theater project. I think you said in 1993. It was supposed to be a 2-year project.
Yeah, it was actually a fight. There was quite a fight. We originally thought that it could be done in as little as 18 months. I said it's just not going to be possible for me to move for less than a 2-year commitment. And they finally kind of begrudgingly said okay, and it took about 5 years ultimately to get it done because we had a lot of things happening, like getting Phantom of the Opera into the Ohio Theater, which took a lot of time and effort to get that done. We were working at the Chicago Theater during that time with getting that involved with Kappa. So it was a process of getting that project underway.
And while you were working at Kappa, or when you arrived, you had a little trouble finding a place to live.
I had 3 days to find a place to live in Columbus, and being from New York City, I was looking for a place downtown to live and had absolutely no luck. And finally, the stage manager of the Ohio Theater, who had been the stage manager since 1955, which was the year before I was born, said you need to go down to German Village and drive around and look for rent signs in the window. And I kind of went, yeah, right, we need to, I don't think my real estate agent's going to think too much of that idea. But I had no better options at the moment, and I did exactly that and saw a for rent sign in a house, half of a house down on City Park Avenue and across the street from Schiller Park, and lived there very happily for about 5 years.
Tell us, so you continued to work with Kappa during the time after the Southern Theater was completed?
Yeah. Several years after the Southern was completed, I was sitting talking to Doug Kreidler and discussing buildings and discussing plans, and I think I was the one who mentioned, or maybe he was the one who mentioned, that I had been there considerably longer than the 2 years, and he said, you okay with that? And I went, yeah, works for me. And that was the end of the discussion about me staying at Kappa. So I stayed there for several years, really a couple of years after Doug left.
You moved to another location in the village.
Yeah, about a block. As people tend to do, they see a house that looks interesting as they are walking up and down the block, and I saw one on 3rd Street, just a couple of doors north of Schiller Park. and moved there. Bought that house, and it was it was largely renovated on the outside. Really a gut job on the inside that I did a lot of work on. But it's what ultimately led to my first, connection with the first contact with the German Village Commission, and that was I needed
a new roof.
I needed a new roof,
Yep.
and I actually got in a big argument with the commission because they had a set of, as we still do, a set of approved roof shingles, and I wanted to use something that wasn't on the approved list, and I had to go through the process of proving. Sorry, this is another dog. I've got a dog in each hand here. I had to go through the process of proving that the shingle that I wanted to use was the shingle that was originally on the house, which I did. There were three layers of shingles on the house. I did a little bit of archaeology and discovered that the shingle that was originally used on the house back in the 1920s was something that wasn't on the approved list. So it was approved.
Speaking of dogs, Jay, your Airedale Stella led to your first involvement in village activities.
It really did. She did. We spent at least 3 times a day, sometimes more, in Schiller Park, basically across the street. And I used to say that I really could have dropped her off in the morning and she would have been happy chasing squirrels all day, and I could have picked her up at night. But during one of our outings there, one of our friends, Lucy's mom, Kara Miller, we all knew each other by our dogs' names, as several of us still do, mentioned Actors Theater Board, and I said, sure, I'll do that. And I went up on the Actors Theater Board for a number of years and helped that organization mature a little bit and change from a board-driven organization to a staff-driven organization. And that also led to involvement with the German Village Society.
Because they met in the meeting house, and you started to get familiar.
Started to become more and more familiar. Wound up on Parks and Public Spaces Committee with the society, both for the dogs and then for Actors Theater. Helped with some planning of the bench locations and garbage can locations in Schiller Park, largely because I knew how to use CAD. So it was a variety of things that led to increasing levels of contact with the society first.
And at some point you leave Kappa, you've got a little bit more time on your hands than you did before.
Yeah, it was just before I left Kappa as things began to get a little more normalized in my professional life after the Ohio Theater, or after the Southern Theater was done, after the big expansion of the Ohio. I had a little more free time and also felt that I had become part of the community to the point where I needed to start thinking about giving something back to the community. Looked around, and I thought the German Village Commission might be the right way to do that.
And you applied to fill an unexpired term.
Yes, and was turned down flat. No, I was turned down flat. That is absolute truth. It was one of the recommended seats by the German Village Society, and that seat went to the late Brent Warner, who was a great commissioner, and I enjoyed, when I became a commissioner, enjoyed the time that we got to spend together.
This was in the first decade of this century, sometime after 2000.
Yes,
that you joined
this is shortly after 2000. Yeah.
Well, tell us how your experience was. I mean, what did you find coming to the commission for the first time?
There are a couple of things that struck me, and it's kind of interesting, and I still think true. The first thing that struck me was after the first meeting, I was just convinced that every project that had come before the commission left the room better than when it came in. In a lot of cases, it was simply a matter of saying yes to people, or in a couple of cases, I think maybe saying no. But the comments of the commissioners were really very much spot on. I, of course, was too nervous to say a word. You nodded a lot and you went, no, I don't have anything to add. But you really had a sense that around the table was gathered a massive amount of expertise that was donating its time to these individual homeowners. and that you really wound up with a better project if you were willing to take advantage of that expertise around the table.
You've mentioned that the variety of backgrounds that of the people on the commission has been a real strength.
Yeah, it is a true strength, and actually something that I believe is absolutely required of any architectural review commission. We're very lucky. We've got an architect who specializes in architectural restoration work. We've got a couple of very, very good attorneys who understand, and it's, they don't represent the commission, they aren't formal legal counsel, but having that way of thinking about things and having the code interpretations available, and just kind of a lawyer's rigorous manner of thinking about things is extremely useful. Having people who are just passionate about historic preservation is absolutely required. I think to some degree we all add to that. Having a home builder is extremely useful. Having a cutting-edge architect is extremely useful and very beneficial to the community.
We just interviewed Klaus Gower, who was a builder, and he felt he brought to the process a level of detail analysis on the guidelines that maybe someone else didn't have.
Yeah, I mean, there's that. Builders look at things differently because they're ultimately the ones who have to make the ends of the two ends join in the middle. And it is, again, in a very different way, but to the same degree, a way of thinking about things that the lawyers bring to the table. It's just a level of experience and a way of looking at a project that a lot of people who come before the commission don't really understand. Even if they're architects that have not practiced in historic districts before. We frequently see that, and we'll have someone who comes in with a great idea, and you just go, "This just isn't something that's going to work here," not because it's bad, but because it won't fit.
And one of the things that you said that people tend to forget is that there are some regulations by the Secretary of Interior that have to be taken into account in your review.
Well, this district is an historic district designated by the United States government by the Secretary of the Interior, who has a whole series of guidelines published about what is appropriate for maintenance, what is appropriate for new construction, for infill construction, for additions. It is a series of responsibilities we have to make sure that the properties within the boundaries of the district remain in adherence to those guidelines, in addition to the German Village guidelines. When we go to renovate or to update the German Village guidelines, we are always looking at the Secretary of the Interior's guidelines to make sure that our guidelines amplify and bring those into focus in a way that is specifically relevant to German Village.
After a few years, you became the vice chairman.
Yeah, our former chair, Cheryl Hacker, invited me to be vice chair, and the commission, we do elections every year. They elected me, and it was great to be able to be vice chair. It probably is the best spot on the commission because you get to say whatever you want to say. You get to remain very focused on the product, and you get to be freed up a little bit more from the process than the chair does. I get to spend time here in my office and at our business meetings focusing on the product. But when you go to the meeting, you go to the public hearings, you really have to make sure that while you don't lose focus on the product, you have to remain very, very focused on the process.
People have to feel like they got a fair hearing.
They got to, they absolutely have to walk out of the room convinced, for sure, confident that they got a fair hearing. But I think that there's just a fundamental fact of being on an architectural review commission that most people don't really get, and that is we're there to say yes. The starting point with review of any project is that an owner should have the right to do with their property what they want to do. Everything else is a limitation on that right. And we take that very seriously. When we say that someone can't do something, we have to have very, very specific reasons why that is inappropriate for that particular case, which is also an issue that comes before the commission. My neighbor did it, why can't I? I saw it down, here are 6 pictures of why the same thing I want to do. And each property has to be treated on its own. And no 2 properties are the same. And also, no 2 periods are the same. Something that was done in 1960 is not necessarily appropriate for today, either because it doesn't meet the Secretary of the Interior's guidelines, or because it's not representative of what is being done today. And that's very important, that the district be kept moving forward. It is not a museum. It is a living community that needs to continue to evolve.
You mentioned that something that might have appeared jarring, say in the 70s when it was constructed, today may very well tend to meld into the environment much better.
Yeah, there are definitely some things that that you walk around and you kind of, your eye glances over them. But if you take a minute and you focus, you realize that something like that would never be allowed today. A lot of the cottages that have been kind of subsumed in these very, very large homes is not something that we allow today. We make sure that the historic structure, the contributing structure, remains primary on every site.
That's been a little bit of an issue too during your tenure, has it not? The idea of a small cottage becoming a large residence.
Yeah. And part of it is because there are so few intact cottages left. We're probably at the point now where there are well under 20 really original cottages left, and we really have to treat those very, very carefully. The days of seeing full-length dormers or seeing 2-story additions kind of jammed up against a cottage is pretty much gone. The guidelines that were rewritten a number of years ago are very clear in the way that that additions need to address the original structures.
Tell us when and how you got to be the chair.
Our previous chair, Cheryl Hacker, decided she wanted to have more fun during her last year on the commission. She had decided that 10 years was going to be 9 or 10 years was going to be enough. And she just asked me one day whether I would be willing to swap. And I think it happened one winter, 5 years ago or so. She said, let's swap next month. And the other members of the commission obviously had a vote on it. Cheryl resigned as chair. I became interim chair for 10 minutes. And we re-voted. She was elected vice chair and I was elected chair.
Jay, you've had some challenges in this position as chair. Tell us what your primary challenges have been while you've been serving.
Well, I think it really derives from what I had been talking about, the need to get people to understand the evolving nature of the community. There are very few opportunities for large-scale projects left in German Village. One of the first that I was chair during most of the development on was Beck Place, which was a largely vacant site, was a commercial property involving a lot of historic pieces. And it was a very challenging, it really took about a year to get the final plans approved as to how that site was going to be redeveloped. And now you drive by it and it has kind of been absorbed into the community. Though the first couple of years of driving by it, it was pretty jarring. Likewise, we have a property down on South 6th Street now that it has got one of the more contemporary additions in German Village, and it's a little jarring. And if we got it right, and only history is going to tell us whether we got it right, but if we did, 20 years from now, you're just going to walk by and it's just going to be another old house with a 2010 addition on it.
There was a little reaction to that by some.
Yeah, there's a what I like to describe as a vocal minority that finds it jarring. And I think that if they look at a lot of the things that were done 20, 30, 40 years ago, they would find those equally as jarring. Time has a way of, it's not just time, but it's time and familiarity has a way of letting things meld into the background much more. And I think that's one of the properties. Again, if we got it right, 20 years from now, nobody's going to be talking about whether, that it was a problem.
It's like a baseball trade. You can't always tell till the careers are over.
That's exactly right. You just don't know. It ain't over till it's over.
What things are you proudest of in your service as commissioner?
That's a good question. It's a tough question. I think that the fact that we've managed to maintain a very high level of commissioner, and that we've managed to attract really quality people to the commission, and it is it's a lot of work. We meet at least twice a month. Some of our meetings can go, 4-hour meeting for our public meetings is standard, and they have gone twice that long. So I think that maintaining a high level of commissioners is really one of the things I'm extraordinarily proud of. I think that also that even though there are disagreements among the commissioners, and sometimes discussed earlier between the commission and the society, everybody sees the value of each other and their places within the commission. It's kind of funny, though. I think the majority of our votes on the commission tend to be. More of them are unanimous than aren't unanimous, frankly. It's very interesting that there are two outliers on the commission. There are two people who, more often than anybody else, and I think that this has been true for quite some time, vote in a 6-1 vote or a 5-2 vote. And oddly enough, it's me and one of the other commissioners who frequently find ourselves as outliers. And I don't think that that's a bad thing. Having a voice that is out there that is saying, yeah, but there's a problem here, even if the majority doesn't feel that it's a problem, hearing that is valuable. And it has an impact both on that discussion and in discussions moving forward. But at the end of the day, we almost always come back together and wind up a very unified voice for historic preservation in the neighborhood.
Yeah, dissent tends to show there's no rubber stamp here. There is considered review going on.
Yeah, absolutely.
You mentioned the roles of the society and the commission. Discuss that a little bit more, how you see those roles.
Well, the society, though the core mission of the society is historic preservation, it addresses it from a very personal role. It is an advocate for the residents of German Village. The commission is an advocate for the architecture of German Village. It is, we are kind of limited to structures. We look at all of the structures in German Village as being valuable and contributing to varying degrees, and it's our job to protect them. And sometimes people come in and they say, well, this is a really good guy, you should let them do this. That's, we can't look at things from that perspective. We look at the long game. And it really is a task of looking at the continuum of things. I would be remiss if I didn't say what I think is one of the most important things about the commission. And that is the thing we are most careful about is demolition, because it is the only thing we do that can never be undone. A bad addition can be removed. bad landscaping can be redone, a bad paint job can be repainted, but once the commission says this contributing structure, this old piece of architecture can be torn down, it is something we never get to say, you know, oh, we want a do-over. And it's something that we spend a lot of time thinking about whenever it comes up, and whether it comes up for a garage or it comes up for a home. We really are extremely cautious about that.
Has your service increased your concern and interest in historic preservation as a whole?
That's a good question. I think, I don't know whether it's increased my interest, it's increased my appreciation of it.
Maybe that's what I'm trying to say.
You know, and I don't know whether it may be just me or it may be society as a whole. You know, we talk about sustainability and sustainable neighborhoods more and more in every context. You know, every conversation you have now about, you know, livable neighborhoods has to do with sustainability. And you know, the most sustainable, the most you know, the best building is the one that you don't tear down, is the one that you restore. And you really need to always look at sustainability from that perspective. You know, the most sustainable windows are not the ones that give you necessarily the highest weather rating. They're the ones that are there today. Because any new window you put in, any new door you put in is going to take a large number of resources that the existing ones are already doing.
Jay, as a fellow who got to see Bob Dylan and Joan Baez in your youth in Greenwich Village, give me your 30-second riff on your feelings about German Village.
Oh, I don't think there is a 30-second riff. You know, years ago, one of the people I talked to when I was thinking about coming here was Mary Bishop, who I had mentioned earlier. She was working at Kappa, or had worked at Kappa. And I called Mary, who was living in Hawaii at the time, and I said, yeah, I'm talking about moving to Columbus and doing this, you know, doing this thing for Kappa. And she said, you absolutely need to do it. You're gonna love it. You're gonna find a great place to live. You're gonna find a nice girl and get married and settle down. And all of it happened exactly as she, you know, I kind of scoffed at it. And I said, I'm going there for 2 years. She said, no, you're gonna stay, you're gonna love it. And Joe Worman telling me that, you know, go for a drive, look for a for rent sign. All of it came very true. At the end of the day, the reason it came true was because of the people. And that is the thing that makes German Village worth living in, and it's the thing that makes German Village the community that it is. It's not, you know, at the end of the day, it's not the architecture. The architecture certainly helps, and it's important. But it's the fact that the architecture attracts the type of people that it does. The people who want to live in this community are the people that I want to live next to.
Jay, thank you very much.
You're very welcome.
Really appreciated the interview, and we enjoyed it. And hopefully generations after us will enjoy it.
That's great. Thank you very much.
All right,
thanks. Question just came up, as you might have heard in the background, how I met my wife. The dogs, of course. Jennifer, it was cold. It was incredibly cold out. I was dutifully taking Stella out, who was a teeny puppy at the time. She was probably... That was probably a week or two after I got her, so it was probably December or January. And we walked into Shore Park. I saw a woman sitting on a picnic bench, kind of huddled against the cold wind. And Stella ran across the lawn.
Oh, good dog.
Oh no, she was allowed, but there was a dog across the way who was very, very carefully stalking a squirrel. And Kinja was a German short-haired pointer, and both of them are gone now. And Kinja was stalking very, very quietly, pointing, and she would move forward a couple of feet. And Stella, just being a puppy Airedale that she just went barreling past Kinja and chased the squirrel up the tree, and Kendra just looked at Stella, you knew what she had in mind. I think she would have been happy to eat Stella at that point instead of the squirrel. And Jennifer started laughing, and we introduced each other. Our dogs came back and introduced us, and I think it was probably 5 years later that we got married. And all of the people at our wedding, we had a wedding dinner at Lindy's, not surprisingly, the day after we got married, and everybody sitting at the table we knew because of the dogs in Shore Park.
So in addition to your 8th grade teacher, Stella, it becomes a very important
Absolutely,
personality.
key to all of it. Key to all of it.
All right, thanks.